Very happy Sabbath to our brethren that are here online today, and would also like to extend that, as Mr. Stevens had mentioned, to those scattered wherever you may be in this world. And maybe you'll hear this message later, so just wanted to say happy Sabbath to you, and appreciate the prayer requests that have been mentioned, and we certainly do want to let each other know that we are here for one another and are praying for one another. And thank you very much for the continued prayers from my uncle. I sure would like to have some more quality time. I miss hearing the stories. I miss listening to them and being able to get the guidance and direction from his years of wisdom in the church. So thank you very much for praying for him, as I continue to do. And it was interesting to listen to that sermon, or that clip of it. I had an entirely different message for today. And in actuality, that sermon started getting pretty close into what I had originally prepared for the sermon. I don't know if I will need to scrap it or not, but well, I'll think about it as I go back over it again. And I know Mr. Gwinner, we'll talk more about the church and prophecy, and I think we can look forward to that. For me personally, one of the absolute greatest weights that is on my heart is the church, the condition of the church, the condition of the brethren and the leaders. And it bewilders me often. I talk about it often. It weighs heavy on my heart often. I truly wish I had the answers. I wish I could help more, but sometimes it's throw your arms in the air and just wonder what can one do these days. I called an audible as such. Decided to change the sermon for today. I think it was Thursday night. I thought, no, I got to go a different direction. Given the information that had come up, I saw a message pop up, and I think it was on our Facebook page. I think that's where I saw it, and it had something to do with, it was a question, I guess, that came up. An individual signed in and talking about, hey, what do you think about these Olympics? And it was on a Friday night, and this opening ceremony stuff. What in the world's going on? I didn't see it, so I wasn't really sure what it was about. And then my wife brought it to my attention, and she started showing me certain things, and I thought, oh, okay, now it started making sense. I wish I could see a show of hands. This is one of those limitations now with the Zoom. I wish I could see a show of hands if anyone did see the opening ceremony of the Olympics this year. If you didn't see it, perhaps you read about it, heard about it in some way. Maybe you saw it in the news. I hope that you're aware of it in some way, shape, or form, because today's sermon probably will not make a whole lot of sense to you if you did not. But once I saw those things come to light, I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did decide that this should be discussed and touched on, which is what I want to do today. Mr. Stevens mentioned that we, as the scriptures command, we are to watch and pray, and there are many things to watch for and many indications to watch for. And certainly the Middle East, and certainly the church, and many other areas that we can keep an eye on as these next, whether it's days, months, or years unfold, things that we will watch. And I think this is one of them. I certainly think this is one of them. Now, as we get into this sermon today, I'm going to do my very best to be as straightforward and truthful as I can. However, I know there's children listening, so I'm going to try and keep it, child friendly as much as I can, with still getting the point across. I think we can do that today. So the Olympics opening ceremony, I just wrote down a few different, I didn't write them down. I printed off a few different news sources. I do hope that you're familiar with it. Not that you had to watch it, and I'm not saying you should have watched it, because my guess is you'd be a little bit put out. I certainly was. But what happened? Well, here's one source. Olympics opening ceremony, Last Supper controversy and misunderstanding. This is from a writer here on July 27th. Written by Jeremy Gray. The controversy surrounding what appears to be a depiction of the Last Supper by drag performers at the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics as the result of a misunderstanding, a popular Birmingham business owner posted on Facebook. The scene in question was not a depiction of the Last Supper, but rather an ancient Greek scene. This choice reflects the Olympics' historical roots in ancient Greece, Johnny Grimes wrote on Saturday. Here's another one. See a screen depicting a person painted in blue near fruit. Behind him is a rainy Paris street with part of the Eiffel Tower and the Olympic rings visible. And this writer says, a performance during the Paris Olympics opening ceremony on Friday has drawn criticism from church leaders and conservative politicians for a perceived likeness to Leonardo da Vinci's depiction of a biblical scene in the Last Supper, with some calling it a mockery of Christianity. The event planners and organizers have denied that the sequence was inspired by the Last Supper or that it was intended to mock or offend. There's another one. World News. Drag queen in Olympic opening ceremony has no regrets. Calls it a photograph of France in 2024. Hugo Bardin, who performs as the drag queen Paloma, felt it was meaningful and important to be a part of Paris Olympics opening ceremony that represented a multifaceted, multi-ethnic France with people of different ethnicities and orientations. I'll skip down a little bit here. This is written by Jocelyn Novak. She's quoting this individual, and he says, it was a really important moment for the French people and the representation of France around the world. And although the ceremony's artistic director, Thomas Jolly, and other participants have repeatedly said the scene wasn't inspired by the Last Supper, critics interpreted that part of the show as a mockery of Leonardo da Vinci's painting showing Jesus Christ and his apostles. Now, these news sources are some of the, I guess what you'd call the more liberal ones. And this came out later. It was hard to find anything initially. They pull a lot of it off, so you couldn't get to it. And then now some of this is coming out. U.S. and world leaders. This one, they say this is from Fox News. So here's a more conservative one. Olympic opening ceremony sparks outrage with drag queens parodying Last Supper, dedicated to the woke. Several U.S. and world lawmakers are denouncing the 2024 Paris Olympics opening ceremony after drag queens and artists made a spectacle of the Leonardo da Vinci painting, The Last Supper, which depicts the last meal Jesus had with his apostles. There's another one. Olympics opening ceremony sparks outrage with drag queens parodying Last Supper. Gone completely woke, all caps. And there's it can go on and on and on. I do hope you are familiar with what I'm speaking about. Again, not that you had to see it, but maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've read it. And there's been quite a bit of controversy about it. And when the other day when I did watch the news, the neighbor's house, there was a lot of talk about it, and there was a lot of outrage because here were these individuals having this depiction of what they thought was the Lord's Supper. Now they're coming out, other sources saying, no, it wasn't the Lord's Supper. It was about the Olympic gods and goddesses, and it wasn't. And now when you look at it, there's definitely some strong evidence that it certainly could be. You know, either way, I don't know what it that matters. I mean, we know the quote unquote Last Supper picture, you know, is really the Passover. We know that's even wrong. But the fact of the matter is, you know, they're upset about this situation of what they think was the Last Supper. And then there was this little child too. There was this blue guy, and there was, you know, the drag queens behind him. There was a little child there, which was very odd, unless it was an adult that, you know, very much looked like a child, but it certainly looked like a child when you see the pictures. And there were some clips you could get at. They might all be gone now, but initially there were a few clips. I think a lot of it's been taken down. I don't know that anybody's upset so much about the drag queens, but they're upset about the fact that they were trying to depict the Lord's Supper or these Olympic gods and goddesses. And I like to, that being said, I like to go to Ecclesiastes now. Ecclesiastes, if you would. Chapter 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and let's just read. It's a well-known verse, verse 9. See, that which has been is what will be, and that which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. You know, a lot of things that even the prophecies that, you know, Mr. Ogwin was talking about, Mr. Munson brought up a little bit, Mr. Stevens, you know, we talk about these prophecies. The prophecies in a lot of ways are scriptures that we read that have a duality to them because there was history to a lot of it as well. And the point is, there's nothing new under the sun. We're facing the same situations, the same problems, the same issues. We face them today as they did 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. There's nothing new under the sun. The world we live in has always had issues and problems. All of mankind's history, and we do have history. Now, you got to be careful of the history you read because it's tainted depending on who wrote it and what their ideology is. But there's certainly lots of history, and no matter who you read it from or no matter what side of the line you're on, it's a history filled with a lot of evil. Mankind's history is a history filled with war, a history filled with violence, human beings against human beings. There's always been pestilence. We've had disease that has run rampant for centuries. We still have it today. We've had and faced these things for millennia in some cases. It's nothing. There's nothing new about it. You've always had rich. You've always had poor. You've always had usury. You've always had injustice. Our world has always been filled with crime, and when you go back to Adam and Eve, and you go back to Cain and Abel, and from there on, it's been a world filled with crime and hate and slavery and racism and you know, the sexual problems that individuals have, whether it's fornication, adultery, various perversions, deviant behaviors that have taken place, all to the imagination of these human beings. It's nothing new for our current day and age. We've always had this stuff. It's always existed. And I don't care if it's the big cities, I don't care if it's the towns, the villages, whatever, churches you want to throw into the mix. They've all had their problems and their scandals, and they always did, and it seems like they always will on the current path that everything's still going. It's all widespread, brethren. These issues have always existed. Yet when we go into the scriptures, we read about God's fiery judgment on the ancient people of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's who we read about. Of all the towns, of all the cities, of all the villages, of all the locations that had all these problems, to one degree or another, we read about God's judgment on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why Sodom and Gomorrah? Why was Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed? Because, again, immorality, homosexuality, these things were common in other parts of the world at that time as well, just like they are today. Yet, unlike Sodom and Gomorrah that we read about in the Bible, they were not destroyed. And why? Why is that? And while we're at it, is there any warning for this for the civilizations of today? As we are to watch and pray, as we are to watch prophecy unfold, is there any warning in the stories and the examples of Sodom and Gomorrah for today? Given the fact of some of these recent events that were at the Olympics of all places. The one individual said, "Oh, we want to share the spirit of France with the world." So that's what they want to share. That's what they want to share. We read about Sodom and Gomorrah. Why Sodom and Gomorrah? And what is the warning for the civilizations of today? The title of the sermon is Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. Brother, let's go to Luke chapter 17, if you would. Luke chapter 17. I'd like to notice here. Let's go to verse 28. So we're getting again, Matthew 24 and some of these prophetic chapters that we're familiar with. We're getting here again a insight as to what it will be like in the latter days, as we call them. We're told here through the words of Jesus Christ in Luke 17, verse 28, he says, "Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot." Okay, so we're given a time frame, we're given a stamp of existence, and we're to watch and look at that and say, okay, that's going to have something to do with the future. There's prophecy involved. It's going to link somehow to our very day and age, to the end times, and it's going to be, we're told by Jesus Christ, as the days of Lot. And he says here, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Sodom and Gomorrah were fairly prosperous cities. We're told here that things were going very well. You don't eat and drink and buy and sell and plant and build if you're not prosperous, if things aren't going well. This tells us that there were good, that the economy was good. This is a positive indication, an indicator of a prosperous cities. That's what they were doing. Things were going well. As we look ahead, we don't have to look for everything to be terribly bad. It's probably not going to be that way. Some people are going to have it very good, just like they did back in the days of Lot, living in Sodom and Gomorrah, where they were building, buying, and selling. But it got so good, and things were so prosperous, and they became so focused on materialism and prosperity that it leads to a certain life of ease. And then now all of a sudden, the necessities become so easy that now they could just focus on the pleasure. And they were so focused on the pleasure that they were blinded to their own problems and their own issues and their own social diseases. Even we, brethren, if we're not careful, I might just be speaking for myself, but maybe you've noticed, have you ever noticed in your life the tendencies that when things are going easy, when everything's going hunky-dory and there's no problems and issues, that sometimes we tend to ease off a bit. Sometimes we get a little bit relaxed in study and prayer and in our relationships and whatever it might be. And then sometimes it's not until some grave trial comes along that we get back to it again. So there is that human tendency. And here was a peoples from two very prosperous cities that fell into this trap on an exponential scale. Now, it was so notorious that when you take the word Sodom, ancient Sodom, they were so known for vice and corruption that we even read in the scriptures where the word was taken from them, the word sodomy, as it applied to perversion, and that word is used to this very day. We find it in the scriptures, even in the New Testament, where the word sodomy is applied to perversion. That comes from a perverted lifestyle. And I'm going to keep it at that. I don't think I need to go any further. Again, I know there's children listening. That's as far as we need to go. I think we understand that. Who's talking about a perverted way of life, and that the name of the city and that the very name, that word was representative of a perverted lifestyle. It got to that degree for them. It was exponential. How bad was it? Just how bad was it? Notice Genesis chapter 18. I know we've read this probably umpteen times in our life. Let's please reiterate it in Genesis chapter 18. And I just want to bring this up again. I won't go through the whole story. It's a remarkable story on many levels. But notice Genesis 18. And Abraham is fighting for the cities. And he starts, you remember the story? He starts, Abraham starts at the 50, and then he starts going down. God, what if I find 50? What if I find this? And what if I find 40? And he just keeps going. What if I find 20? I mean, just remarkable enough that here's this human being reasoning with our Creator. But then he goes all the way down to verse 32. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And so the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So how bad was it? I don't know the exact populations. Sodom and I don't have the census. I don't know the population. we drive down the road now, and when you come up to a town or a city, there's usually a sign, and it's the city of such and such population, whatever it might be. But I'm sure there were many, many people, thousands, maybe millions. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is this: when you really think about it and really think about the story, he couldn't find 10 people. 10. God said he wouldn't do what he was going to do if Abraham could find 10 people. 10. I mean, we have, counting women and children and kids, I don't know, we probably have 20 or 25 just right here, right now. 10. Couldn't find 10. Couldn't find 10 people having some kind of knowledge of God, having some kind of respect to the true God, having some kind of reverence for the laws of God. Couldn't find 10. Some resemblance of character. I find that remarkable when you really think about it. 10 people. I guess when you think of it in those terms, it's certainly impactful. That of all the hundreds, thousands, maybe millions, whatever it was, I don't know, he couldn't find 10 people. Apparently, the only one that cared at all was Lot. The only one that had any kind of value or any kind of care or concern about any, it was Lot. And Lot had his own issues. We know that. The Bible does call him righteous. But here were these cities. Absolutely, I guess the word would be infested with moral decay, infested with moral evil and social evil and spiritual evil. It was so bad, brethren, and so renowned that even Ezekiel, centuries later, refers back to Sodom as an example, and he's speaking to his own nation, and he's trying to warn them, and he's saying, hey, wake up. We can read it, Ezekiel chapter 16. Notice here, Ezekiel chapter 16. Let's read Ezekiel 16, and let's drop down. Verse 48. As I live, says the Lord God, neither your sister Sodom nor her daughters have done as you and your daughters have done. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. And it's amazing how when people have too much time on their hands, it typically leads to nothing but bad. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw fit. Here's Ezekiel writing about it. The whole social fabric of the cities, brethren, had rotted. And the thing about it is, they liked it. They were proud of it. Oh, we want the whole world to know. Look at us. What happens is there becomes an inordinate focus on self. It's just self and self-seeking and self-pleasure. And what Ezekiel says here is it got so bad that they just had no concern for others. There's people in need, You know, and people who sometimes just need some help, and there was no willingness to help anybody. They were proud of it, haughty about it. And there was tremendous toleration for all of it, for every bit of it. And they tolerated the idolatrous worship, and it was of the most licentious type, because what happens is, I see, it ends up being a rabbit hole. You know, you get a fix, and then that doesn't become quite enough anymore, and so you have to go stronger, and then you get another fix, and then that's not quite enough anymore, and so you get even a stronger fix, and you get into this downward spiral, this rabbit hole, and it goes further and further and further. And that's what was going on there. And the shock value was completely gone. There was no shock value to anything. You know, sometimes you think, oh, did you see that? And you're just shocked. Well, when you get to the point where you see something you shouldn't be seeing, and there's no shock to it anymore, then you get to the point where you can see how things are tolerated and accepted, and how it leads us down the rabbit hole. And they were proud of it. The Bible says so. They were haughty about it, got a big kick out of it. But God in heaven looked down upon it, and he saw things very differently, is what we also learned. God didn't share their same point of view. God saw how degenerated they had become, how they went down to this absolute bottom line society. In everything, on every social responsibility you can think of, they had plummeted and degenerated to a bottom line society. They utterly perverted everything and anything that was decent and good and right. Find the values of those peoples, both in just on a social platform, on a social level, and even the sexual values of Sodom and Gomorrah were not bound by any stable spiritual or social rules. And lifestyles could be whatever they wanted them to be. Rules and values could be broken just as easily as they were made. It didn't matter. There was no restraint. Nothing stopped them. There was no concern for the base thinking. After all, who could say what was right or wrong? I mean, who's to say? Who are you to say what's right? And who is that person to say what's wrong? Does it sound familiar? Have you ever heard in our modern day, judge not? Who are you to judge? Well, I have to be true to myself. And all these things we hear today. It's what this leads to, and it's where it goes. And there was an entire atmosphere that was created, an atmosphere of promiscuity, of abuse, depersonalization. You know, to depersonalize something is when you take away the human value. That human is not a human anymore. That human is just a thing. That human is just an object. It was an atmosphere of alienation, lack of responsibility, a lack of responsibility for one's own actions, and it became nothing but an absolute diabolical get way of life. I'll get what I want. Get. You know, for when I was thinking about this, I had to reckon back a little bit. Now, I was pretty young, but you know, when you look at the Get Back on Track years, and you know, Mr. Armstrong would constantly talk about the two trees, and I've heard the stories brethren were just sick and tired of hearing about the two trees. Just, can't you say something else? Talk about something else. I'm sick of, but tired of these two trees, the two trees, the two trees. But the thing about the two trees, and I think the power of it is how Mr. Armstrong explained it, and he brought it down to the most basic plane, the most basic level, and they represented what? What did he say they represented? The give way or the get way? That simple. One is the give way of God or the get way of Satan, the devil. He brought it down to that very simplistic and vivid illustration so that we could get it. I don't know who, I don't know how many got it. I'm not even going to be so haughty to say I got it, but as I look around today, and as I watch, as we are admonished to do, and as you look at the stuff that's going on, I mean, it almost seems to me we're right back to the two trees again. What it seems like. Give or get. And Mr. Armstrong contrasted, these two ways: the free willing lifestyle, the get lifestyle, the no holds barred lifestyle, versus the laws of God that govern social aspects, govern spiritual aspects, govern the sexual life of a human being. God's laws give boundaries to what is right and wrong. Why? Because they're meant to protect us. That's why. And when you go outside those bounds, you're now open to attack. You're now open to hurt. You're now open to pain and suffering, which the entire history of mankind's existence shows. Yet, it was Sodom and Gomorrah that we read about in this fiery judgment. The laws of God, brethren, they give direction and they bring us protection, all to the achievement of wholesome living, wholesome fulfillment, life fulfillment, whether it's social, whether it's spiritual, whether it's our needs, our wants, our aspirations, our goals in life. Not so with Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah, they were most noteworthy. We read here what Ezekiel, he talked about the pride and the haughtiness and their get versus give and their lack of helping and just the focus on the self. But their most noteworthy contribution to the human experience was their code, if you will, of sexual ethics. And again, I'm not going to go any further than that. I hope that's okay. The incident with Lot, Jesus Christ said, he refers back to Lot. He's going back to that time frame. He's going back to that story, and he's saying prophetically, it's going to be like that. And the incident of Lot, the visitors that come there, and all the individuals that that came into that situation, it's the tip of the iceberg as to what was going on in Sodom. So let's review that a little bit. Genesis chapter 19. Genesis chapter 19. Notice verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. The fact that, he was a man of stature in that city, sitting in the gate. And when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them. He bowed himself with his face toward the ground, as we typically see when it comes to the things of God. Bow forward to the ground. And he said, "Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go your way." Then they said to him, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly. Why? Why? He insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread. Gives us a time frame of the incident. And they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them carnally." So it's an interesting thing in itself. But notice, I want you to notice something. Who were these individuals? Perhaps I'm sure you've read this many times, but notice what he says here. He says, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. It gives us an indication of just how universal and how base these individuals were. You know, there's probably a lot of it. I'll just speak for here in the United States. I'll bet you it's similar to other countries. But, you know, you can go to a certain city, for instance, and, you know, there's what we call the wrong side of the tracks. You know what I mean? You've probably used that statement or heard that statement before. Well, that person's from the wrong side of the tracks. And there's certain areas that, you know, are known that for you just stay out of that area. I think here of East St. Louis. You know, there was a time and a day that East St. Louis was known as one of the model cities for the United States of America. And then through circumstances and time, there was a turnover of peoples and individuals, job losses, and then one thing led to another. And now when you think of East St. Louis, what do you think of? If anybody who knows anything about East St. Louis, you stay away. That's the wrong side of the city. You don't go there. It's extremely dangerous. And so if you go to East St. Louis, knowing how dangerous it is, you expect to see bad things there. But that's not what we're told here in the scriptures. It was young and old, and they came from every quarter. That's how bad it was. How widespread. They came from all parts of the city. And not only did they didn't come for a cordial visit, they came because they wanted to know these visitors, these two strangers who they didn't even know. And they wanted to know them carnally, as we're told here. And so they're trying to force perversion on these total newcomers to their city. And it wasn't just the bad part of town. It wasn't the scum of the earth people, as maybe we'd call them, or whatever phrase you want to use. You know, it wasn't the gang. It wasn't this or that. It was young and old alike from every quarter of the city. These people sank so low in their jaded lusts that they didn't hesitate to even resort to violence and abuse to get what they wanted. Not even after they were struck with blindness. Like they still wanted it. Even in blindness. Keep reading here in verse 6 as we continue on. So Lot went out to them through the doorway and shut the door behind him. And he said, please, my brethren. And so even Lot had tolerated too much at this point. Even Lot had let down too much at this point. He calls them my brethren. Do not do so wickedly. See, now I have 2 daughters. So here is a cowardly act. I guess in his mind, he thought this was less offensive, less sinful for some reason. They have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may do as you wish to them. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they came under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with him. And so they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands, pulled Lot into the house with them, shut the door, and they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. But they didn't try to stop finding the door, did they? Because they weren't ashamed of their actions. They weren't ashamed at what they were doing. They had gone so far, they didn't know to be ashamed of it anymore. And then their smug, self-assured pride, these people had accepted this lifestyle. You know, to them it would have been free morality. We're enlightened. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? And then they become infuriated with Lot. Why were they so mad at Lot? He says, they make the statement, we just read it. Verse 9, he keeps acting as a judge. You know, in other words, who are you to tell us we're wrong? That's what they meant. That's what they were saying. Who are you to judge us? You know, you're fairly new to this town too. Who are you to tell us we're wrong and to tell us what we can and cannot do? How dare you? So this account with Lot and his neighbors, my brethren, as he called them, is, brethren, it was not just about homosexuality. It represented all types of perversion and corruptness that, quote unquote, came out of the closet. I want to read, well, I'm not going to read it. I've lost track of the acronyms, so I printed this off. It says LGBTQIA plus. What does LGBTQIA plus mean? And then it goes through this story about how things developed, whether it was back in the 50s and then back in the 70s. And again, this stuff's been around a long time. It's nothing new. And then how they added another one in they added the Q in 2016, and then they had to start with the L because, you know, they wanted to include all that, and then it goes through the letters because they're explaining this in acronym. And then we'll read this one little section I thought was interesting, and it gets to the plus. It gets down to the plus because it's this LGBTQIA plus. What does the plus mean? Well, there's a plus sign at the end of the acronym, meaning anyone who is not listed in an acronym but still identifies as part of the community. And then it gives even a longer list of things I've not even heard of, and I'm not going to mention because it's not worth mentioning. But the point is, here we have, again, you go back to the situation with Lot, It wasn't just about that one thing. It was about a perverted lifestyle to the nth degree, or as it's called today, the I plus, the plus, because we want to make sure we're going to add all this weird stuff and make it inclusive into the community, as they call it. And they have parades, and they have what? Pride, Pride Week or Pride Month or all these things. Pride. Interesting, it's called pride. And you start seeing the connection, and even Ezekiel's talked about you're proud and you're haughty, and to this very day, they still calling it pride. And they were proud about it, and they were proud about parading it around back then, and they're proud about parading it around today, right out in the open, right out in the public streets. Here you're watching Olympic Games, which is a world renowned activity that has been going on for centuries, and even there it comes out. Oh, we want to have this pride of France to show everybody. And it's not just France. It's many Israelite countries. It's the world we live in. They were public about it, and especially at night. Remember how we read up here? Remember here in verse chapter 19, we're in here in Genesis, but he's talking to the servants of God. He says, please turn in your servants and spend the night, wash your feet, and rise early. He says, no, we're going to spend the night in the open square. And he insisted strongly. Why? Because he didn't want them out in the open at night. Because very typically, very bad things happen at night. And Lot didn't want God's servants staying out at night, because there was no respect for the standards of normalcy. It was gone. It had slid to that degree. I remember, well, my dad got it from his dad, and there was the saying, I'm sure my uncle will remember, anybody out past 9 o'clock is up to no good. I heard that for years. Just seems like bad things happen at night, happen in the dark. And Lot was insistent that they wouldn't stay out in the night. And you see what they did. They were ready to bang down his door and by violence and force take what they wanted. Notice Jude, if you will, in the New Testament, the book of Jude. Notice here, verse 7. Jude, verse 7. As Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. It's one thing to fall short in life. We all make mistakes, or let's just call it what it is. We all sin. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Only Jesus Christ as a human being has not sinned. We all sin. We all have hiccups. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. It's one thing to sin, to recognize that sin, repent of it, which means turn around and go the other way. That's one thing. But it's a whole nother thing, as Jude writes here, where they give themselves over to it. And they gave themselves over to every kind of immorality and lust they could conjure in their minds. They were extremely unchaste. It was the full spectrum, brethren, of immorality, to include every kinked out act that a human being can think of in his imagination. And the list is long, and it's so long that now we just say plus. For Sodom and Gomorrah, it was freedom. It was a revolution. No holds barred. We're free. And there was absolutely no discrimination based on preference or orientation, as we heard from that individual who was in the news source. But you see, God has wonderful laws on sex and marriage. And it wasn't a matter of them being ignored. They were utterly and completely rejected. And they were so far from God and so far from his laws that they were so very far away for the very purpose of human life, and so proud of it all that they became unrestrained in their immorality until they were finally wiped off the face of the earth without a trace. What people don't realize is that when you go against the laws of God, true happiness vanishes. Wholesomeness is gone. The outlook becomes completely converted, because what happens is now there's a vacuum, there's a void, and in their humanity they do all these things to try and fill the void. And they do it with every sensual act they can possibly think of. And it becomes very selfish and very self-centered, and that becomes the paramount concern. And then sensualism becomes the absolute inordinate focus of all. And then the real problem is the children. Because we have to include that in the story. Every inhabitant of Sodom and Gomorrah was not just an adult. Obviously, there were children that were growing up in those cities. And the children would have been increasingly ensnared in these attitudes. Even from an individual that sins and repents of it, the scriptures say it will take 4 to 5 generations to get that out, let alone those who will not repent. There was very little value for human life. And like I said earlier, people became things, and people became objects to gratify lust, and they would do it by force if necessary, as we read in Genesis 19. And this way of life, this lifestyle, if you will, it plunged the people into increasingly distorted, debased human character, and they didn't even know it. They didn't even know it. And so God saw this. God looked down. God saw their character. God recognized the issue with their descendants, with their prodigy. He saw that it was going to be perpetual, and it was going to continue down the rabbit hole of perversion, and so God had to intervene. Because had they gone on, it would have been improbable, if not impossible, for them to ever achieve God's purpose for them in a future resurrection. So God in his mercy intervened with a catastrophic punishment in that fiery judgment. Now we can notice Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11. And again, Jesus Christ speaking, Matthew chapter 11. And he makes this comparison with those of his own day and age in Matthew 11, verse 23. And you, Capernaum, who are exalted to heaven, will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Sodom, of all places, it would have remained until this day. But I say to you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. So there is a coming day of judgment. They will be in the second resurrection. And even the Sodomites will have their opportunity. Even those of Gomorrah will have their opportunity for salvation and a future resurrection and a future day of judgment. And they're going to listen. They're going to listen. Notice again, brethren, Luke chapter 17. Let me go back there. I know we read it earlier. I want to go a little bit further, though, this time. Luke 17. Luke 17, again, verse 28. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. God said it would be this way today. God said so. The scriptures show us, brethren, that world conditions will, when Christ returns, are going to be as the days of Lot. The social sickness is a modern fulfillment of prophecy. And we're seeing it with our very eyeballs. Christ commanded us to watch world conditions, to watch and to pray and to be aware of his imminent return. The rising perversions that we see is just one more indication or one more indicator of society's moral sickness as a whole, but it's not contained, brethren. It's affecting a broad aspect of all humanity. Because no longer is it in the closet, no longer is it contained. It's been let out. It's full of pride. And now it's infecting the airwaves. And so now they don't have to try and beat down our doors, do they? Because we let them right in now. They don't have to beat down the door. We think, well, how do we do that? Because it's in the airwaves. And it infects our TV. It infects the radio. It infects the things we read, whether it's the newspapers, whether it's magazines and books, and now the internet. I mean, you can see, think, hear, and do anything, just touch of a button. And the kids are better at it than us. So the point is, no one is safe from the pollutions of today's Sodom and Gomorrah. It can be a movie. You can watch a movie and 99% of that movie is about something completely different, but some way, shape, and form, they slip it in. You can watch a commercial about, a Volkswagen Bug and Tide soap, and so one way or another, they'll slip it in. Right into our houses, right into our homes, right into our eyes, right into our ears, right into our minds. Could even be the Olympics, apparently. Could even be cartoons. You think, oh, cartoons, that's for children. That's safe. No, it's not. It's not safe. And so as parents, and I include myself, I'm a parent. Parents, you have a tall order. Parents, you must endeavor to protect your children. Protect them in every way that you can. And we each have to figure that out. We have to protect our children. Don't be lulled to sleep. Don't be desensitized. That to me is a key word for today's day and age, being desensitized. We become desensitized, and I would venture to say, and maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but I would venture to say we allow things today that we wouldn't have 10 years ago. because of being desensitized. When you see something often enough and you hear something often enough, it starts little bit by little bit by little bit, it sticks. And I look at the joke of the rating system, as we call it. You got a PG or G and a PG and a PG-13 and rated R, and you can watch if you go back and you watch an old movie from 30 years ago, and it was PG. It's the PG of today is very different than the PG back then. How did that happen over the span of 20, 30, 40, 50? How did that happen? Called desensitizing. Little by little, little by little, little by little. We got to protect our children. Everybody, even the so-called conservatives out there, they're mocking the Da Vinci's Last Supper. Oh, how dare they? What about the fact that they're drag queens? What about that? I mean, that's the real sin. I find it interesting that Olympic show was religious based. I find that interesting. Now, whether it was mocking Christianity, they claim it wasn't. It was just talking about the gods and goddesses of Olympia and all that. Either way, it's religiously based. And notice, if you would, 2 Kings. 2 Kings. I find it interesting, and here's why. Notice 2 Kings. There's probably a number of examples we could look at. I think this is a good one, though. It's an example of Josiah, King Josiah, 2 Kings 23. So he's cleaning things up. He's trying to restore true worship. They got so far away from God, and he's trying to bring things back. And notice what he has to do here. Notice one of the things, 2 Kings 23, verse 7. Then he tore down the ritual booths of the perverted persons that were in the house of the Lord. Whoa. That's how infiltrated it got? Where the women wove hangings for the wooden images. Perverted persons. What does he mean, perverted persons? It means those who are practicing sodomy and prostitution in their religious rituals. That's what he's talking about. All the further we need to go. And brethren, sodomites are many times mentioned in the Bible in conjunction with religion. That's why I find it interesting, the situation that we're looking at today with the Olympics. The scriptures also show that, and it seems like every time there's this infiltration of paganism and Baal worship, it gets into the true religion of ancient Israel and modern day Israel, and it creates a block of the true worship of God. And even when you look at Revelation 2 and 3, it says the same issues are there. When he goes through the 7 churches, pointing to the eras. Notice, please, Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 21. It says here, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, and the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed over forever. Amen. And for this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchange the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise, also men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burn in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, we don't want God telling us what to do. God gave them over to a debased mind to do things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to their parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. God says he's giving them up over to these shameful passions. There's no defense for the conduct. They know well enough. They know the just decree of God for those who behave like this, but they do it anyway, and they're proud of it. They applaud it. The total and openly flagrant abandonment of all moral norms is rapidly being pushed on all of us. And it would seem, brethren, being pushed to the point where God's going to have enough. Where God's going to have enough. Notice Lamentations chapter 4. Lamentations chapter 4. Notice here. Lamentations chapter 4. Verse 6. The punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment, with no hand to help her. Unless these things are stopped, unless society turns, unless society repents and goes back to God and seeks God and the ways of God and the laws of God, the moral corruption of modern society will actually surpass Sodom. Unless all nations give heed to God's warning message, they're going to go beyond the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's going to be Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. If they refuse to take advantage of this prolonged period of God's mercy, as he awaits to see whether people will repent or not, brethren, then prophecy will irrevocably come to pass, and we're seeing it before our very eyes. Final scripture, 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2. Notice here, 2 Peter 2. And let's just read. We'll just break into it here, verse 6. 2 Peter 2:6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who would live ungodly. The events that shattered those cities more than 3,800, 3,900 years ago are very clear examples. They're not abstract. They're not muddy. They're not muddled. You can't get away from it. It's as clear as day. And it's an example to each and every one of us. It is an example to this very world that we live in today. But it seems, despite these examples, that it's turning into Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. The societies of Sodom and Gomorrah, brethren, I don't think they started out that way. I really don't. I don't think they started out that way. I don't think they started out in abject immorality. But we do find that they ended up that way. You know, what happened between point A and point B? What happened? And I think for us personally, that's a very serious question, because obviously you and I, we're not going to make the whole world repent. You know that, I know that. But as a mom, as a dad, as a grandpa and a grandma, you know, your family is your kingdom. My family is my kingdom. And, you know, what can we do for our kingdoms? And so it becomes important to ask questions. What happened between A and B? How did they get from here to there? And I think a lot of it goes back to, you know, the issues of tolerance, and the issues of compromise, and the issues of the power of subtleness, and what we allow into our home. They're not beating down our doors anymore. They don't have to. It just comes in through the airwaves. And so I don't think they started out that way, but they certainly ended that way. They became that way through an increasing acceptance and tolerance of, and letting down, if you will, of certain values and attitudes. And it got to the point that they didn't even discriminate between good and evil, and they yelled out loud, "How dare you judge us? Who are you?" So, brethren, it is not exaggerating to say that many nations today, Israelite and Gentile alike, many nations today are on their way to becoming new Sodom and Gomorrahs. We are to watch. We are to pray. The fate of Sodom and Gomorrah in history points to prophecy, and it stands as a warning to all.